Hi, and I'm Renny Hartman, and for Literary Gladiators today, I'm going to discuss the novel Les Miserables, which we can see is a long, huge work, but not atypical of the time in the early to mid 1800s, the height of the Romantic movement and the development of the novel, when people had enough wealth and education to have some leisure and they had time to read. The short story actually develops after the novel. Hugo was born in France in 1802 and lived a long life into his 80s, died in 1885. He became wildly recognized and popular as an artist, a man of literature, and also a man of politics. He begins writing early. He and his brothers have their own literary magazine. They publish their own works. One of his other famous novels that has also been a famous movie is The Hunchback of Notre Dame. And later he began in the 1840s Les Miserables, which means the wretched, the poor of the earth. And his main characters emphasize this idea because he has a convict, an ex-convict, and an escaped convict, Jean Valjean, as his central person, a man who was originally convicted of stealing a loaf of bread to feed his sister's children, showing the terrible use of the law at the time and almost no way to get around the verdicts that were delivered. He also has a young woman, although in the book she's not quite as big a part as she will become when they develop a musical from Les Miserables. Fantine was a young and beautiful woman, not really very well educated, not in any way connected socially at the time when stratification was very, very strong in France and the rest of the world. She has a lover that she believes will be the light of her life. He abandons her without looking back. She finds herself pregnant and gives birth to a young girl, and then spends her life trying to support herself and her daughter. She cannot work in Paris at the time and have her daughter with her, so she farms her out to an innkeeper and his terrible wife, and then has to pay them. She not only has to work to support herself, but she has to support her daughter and this innkeeper, the Thénardiers. In the musical, there's a wonderful song for the master of the house, who is the innkeeper, but the characters don't play exactly major parts, whereas they are the Thénardiers, and they do run through most of the novel as master and not so master thieves and members of the underworld. And although there's one child portrayed of theirs in the musical, they have several children, none of whom are very well taken care of, and also become members of the Parisian underworld. Fantine secures a job with Jean Valjean in a factory, but her compatriots are upset with, I think, partly her beauty, partly the fact that she's independent, and then when they learn that she has an illegitimate daughter, and she's propositioned by men that are available, she is fired. She degenerates, becomes a prostitute, and in the novel, actually, she sells her hair, she sells her teeth in order to support her daughter and continue on, and she dies young. She has Jean Valjean promise he will take care of Cosette, and he does take care of Cosette. And Cosette is here from the musical, that was on the musical and on the playbill, that actually takes its place on the novel, which didn't have probably such a character to begin with. The novel runs over a number of years. It's all Jean Valjean's life. It's the growing up of Cosette. I will say, if the characters maybe aren't as developed as they would have been if this book had been written during a period of realism, I think because to some degree they are symbolic. Cosette is the child who's abandoned and for whom there is no law or social force to defend her. Jean Valjean was criminally convicted of what would be today a minor theft and condemned to years at hard labor. And Fantine is the young girl that, having fallen in love mistakenly with the wrong person, is also condemned to a life of poverty and early death. So they are kind of symbols in a way more than people. Of course, Jean Valjean is extremely well developed because we go through his whole life. Probably the next most well-developed character is Marius, who becomes Cosette's love and husband, but he doesn't appear in the very beginning of the novel. He is more multi-sided because his grandfather believed he was saved by Thénardier at Waterloo, when the truth is Thénardier was robbing corpses and simply saved Marius's grandfather by mistake. But he has this double side to him because he thinks the Thénardiers are wonderful when anyone reading the novel knows that they are really terrible people, and he has to come to a realization. He also reacts very negatively towards the end of the novel when Jean Valjean believes he has to reveal his criminal past, and he's very much rejected by Marius. And then Jean Valjean becomes what we would call depressed, refuses to eat, and brings on his own death. But he and Cosette and Marius come to agreement and reconciliation on his deathbed. I think the worst criticism of the book that I read was that it was over melodramatic. The problem with that criticism is it's written at the time of the high romantic movement. The realistic development of characters was not exactly one of the ideas focused upon by artists at the time. He's writing at the same time Poe is in the United States, Wordsworth's playing cards with Queen Victoria in England, and so maybe he might be looked at today a little bit as a social justice warrior. In his politics, he was very much for universal education, free education for both men and women. At that time, women were not highly educated. He was against slavery. He was an early person to be against slavery, which was then certainly practiced around the world. And he wanted to end the death penalty. He certainly wanted to reform in some way the French justice system, which imposed so much injustice on people. In his life, he was wildly popular in France, and when one of the kings declared himself an emperor, he went into exile in Brussels, and then he went into exile on the Channel Islands in England, and there he finished Les Miserables. So the novel covers several decades because he started it at one place and he finished it at another. It was published in 1860 and was wildly popular in its time in France, in Europe, and the United States, although again, the critics were not really accepting or praising of the novel. One of the things they didn't like are the fact that we go through a tremendous amount of material that is certainly not incorporated in the musical, because he takes these digressions on Napoleon. He has kind of an ambivalent, I think, attitude towards Napoleon. He thought that Napoleon's being an emperor was horrendous. That kind of power he thought was terrible. On the other hand, he thought Napoleon made France France, because before that it was its separate Provençal, Normandy, Aquitaine, and that Napoleon gave France its actual kind of nationhood. He would have been called a Republican at the time because he didn't actually oppose monarchy, but he opposed absolute power. He was made a peer in France in 1845. At that time, he used his father's Spanish title of Viscount. And when he died in 1885, 2 million people waited days to pass his case on. And he is considered, of course, today still one of France's #1 artists of all time. He influenced Dickinson, he influenced Camus, he influenced almost all writers afterwards. And I am sure he would be excited and would have been very interested to have been involved in the development of the play and the movie, which I have seen 3 times, the play. I have the movie on DVR, and I also have on DVR the 25th anniversary of the play in concert style. So I have to say, when I had to read the novel because I had seen all these other derivations based on the novel, but had not read the novel itself. And I highly recommend Les Miserables. Take time. If you don't want to read it all at one sitting, take time and read it bit by bit. The plot is probably known, so you don't have to worry about the plot. The characters are probably known. You don't have to find them in as new people. There are many more characters in the novel than I have mentioned, of course, from people in the army, generals that are mentioned, entire battles that are described, the entire sewer system of Paris and its development is described, how streets got their names and how they were renamed or how they don't exist anymore, so that Victor Hugo packed a tremendous amount of his knowledge and memory into the book. And I learned much more about the Napoleonic Wars, especially the Battle of Waterloo, than I had ever known, and was glad of it. So thank you very much, and I recommend the book, and I recommend you keep reading.